and welcome back to By the Fire podcast, where I, Ken, your host, take you through mythical tales and creatures from across the Black diaspora. Today, I'll be reading my own story called Curiosity, which is about the Asanbosam and particularly the silk cotton tree. I decided to make the story as part of the Kofi challenge, which is to showcase your glow up from when you started doing your creative work to now. And 2 years later, I think I'm making some progress now that I'm making my own original stories. And the very first episode, the introduction episode, was actually about the silk cotton tree. So I thought, why not include my own spin on it and actually create my own story as a way of showing my creative glow up. And I've got so much more room for improvement, but I think, 2 years, here's what I'm showing. And I really hope you enjoy the story. Grandma and Little Jay were taking a walk through Iroquois forest when Little Jay saw a tree in the distance that appeared to not have any green foliage like the countless others. "Grandma, why is that one all dead looking?" Jay pointed towards the derelict tree. Peering towards his direction, Grandma noticed the silk cotton tree in the distance. In shock, she hurried them away until it was well out of sight. Little Jay, bewildered by her suddenness, tightly grasped onto her hand, even when she had finally stopped rushing through the greenery. Lowering herself to meet his eyes, she gave her naive grandchild a grave warning. "Your mother never told you about that tree?" Little Jay shook his head furiously, feeling the tears prickle in his eyes. Sighing in defeat, Grandma scooped the little boy into her lap and offered him a sliced mango. Accepting it in glee, Jay took a huge bite whilst nestled into her arms. "Okay, little one, I suppose it's time someone tells you about the silk cotton tree." Cassandra and Ty were two special friends. "Special friends, Grandma? Hush, let me continue." Cassie and T were walking through the forest when they came across a tree with no leaves. Curiosity getting the better of him, he approached it until the giant branches were hanging directly above. Peering up, he noticed the lines on the trunk begin to shift. "T, what are you doing?" Cassie called from behind, a far distance from the young man. She hadn't noticed as he slipped from her side. T, too enamored by the sorcery, ignored her question. The gentle ambience of the forest began to settle until not one leaf stirred with the wind. As the silence grew, T noticed the markings on the bark shift more erratically until a grinning smile formed on its face. Jerking back, T frowned before shaking his head in disbelief. "Cassie, come look at this." He spun around to find that she was not there. Peering around the tree, he noticed a figure hanging upside down from a tree branch, with hooks for feet securing it around the sturdy offshoots. As if suddenly losing all sense of fear, T inched towards this apparition. Standing face to face, two fangs appeared in its grinning mouth, guarded by a dishevelled beard, and two small horns sticking out from the top of its head. The same smile that tattooed the tree trunk. With its eyes closed, the figure stayed still, completely unswayed by T, who was now yelling for Cassie. Whipping his head back to the tree, he came back to find the figure's eyes now wide open. Stumbling back in fear, T took in the mystical being in front of him. Suddenly feeling faint, he glanced up, and standing no taller than 5 feet, the scrawny figure hung with its arms flaying loosely past its head. "What is it, Grandma?" "The Asanbosam." Creeping closer, T watched the Asanbosam open its mouth, further revealing its iron teeth. "What is it that you seek here?" it rasped, its gaze following T's. T, no longer being able to stand upright, moved closer to the trunk, resting against his large frame. The Asanbosam had now distorted its body, so its breath was inches from T's cheek. Too exhausted to think, T called out to his friend in a futile effort. It was as though the tree isolated the poor man in his own dimension. Cassie, on the other side, panicking at his disappearance, tried to call him, but his phone was out of service. "Cassie," T whimpered. "Ty?" he heard. Finally, looking over to his left, he saw her sitting on the branch above him, her legs safely hooked around it. Shaking his head in disbelief, he called to her. "What are you doing up there? I don't feel too good." "Come, enjoy the quiet view from up here. It'll make you feel better." Where did the hanging man go? With the teeth and his eyes red?" she finished. Burrowing his brows, he tugged his dreads in frustration. "You saw him, Cass?" Ignoring his question, she continued to beckon him. In defeat, he leaned over to where her feet dangled by him. Feeling her shoes against his head, he suddenly felt claws clamp his shoulders and drag him off the ground. "You sure you want to hear what happens next, boy?" Yes, yes. He grinned, gleaming at the horror his mother sheltered him from. Before he could even release a breath, the Asanbosam, now reappearing where Cassie sat, leant back to open its mouth wide, chomping Ty's head clean off its neck. Drinking the blood of the very dead man, the creature chuckled in satisfaction, before tightly grasping the limp body, sinking into the branches with its latest victim. Where was Cassie then, Grandma? She ran home to try and get help for her friend who had vanished, but by the time they returned, all that was left were his bloody trainers at the foot of the tree. None of the people wanted to approach it and warned others of what they saw. So don't you be smart and wander off without me, you hear? Thank you for listening. I hope you really enjoyed the story. The transcript will be available on my Ko-fi. And yeah, it's always really good to reflect on the progress you've made and figure out what more needs to be done to improve, but also just appreciate how far you've come. Be sure to rate and comment on Apple Podcast and follow on Spotify. You can also listen on SoundCloud and YouTube, and use the hashtag BTFpod so we can continue the conversation online, and I look forward to you joining me for the next episode. Follow at bythefire_pod on Instagram, TikTok and Twitter, as well as By the Fire Podcast on Facebook. You can also join my free mailing list where I post a video with extra information relating to this episode. And if you'd like to financially support, you can support my Ko-fi, ko-fi, where you'll be able to access behind the scene footage and transcripts of every story, depending on which membership tier you join. If you have a creature of folklore you'd like to hear or would like to be a guest on the show, send a submission on my website, www.bythefirepodcast.com. If you scroll all the way down, there'll be a submissions box where you can send me your ideas. And yeah, I'd love to hear from you. Next week, I'll be sending an email to those in my mailing list where they'll be able to receive all these extra tidbits. And yeah, if you want to be a part of that, get to it. Otherwise, I can't wait for you to join me again in 2 weeks' time by the fire. Bye!